nothing but faith in nothing. Wanna put my tender heart in a blender, watch it spin around to a beautiful oblivion. Rendezvous, now I'm through with you, with you. I alone am the one you don't know you need. Take heed, feed your ego. Make me blind when your eyes close, sink when you get close. Tie me to the bedpost. I alone am the one you don't know you need. You don't know you need me. Make you blind when your eyes close. Tie me to the bedpost. I would swallow my pride, I would choke with the rise, but the lack thereof would leave me empty inside. Swallow my doubt, turn it inside out, find nothing but faith in nothing. Wanna put my tender heart in a blender, watch it spin around to a beautiful oblivion. Rendezvous, then I'm through. Now I'm through with you. Through with you. Rendezvous, then I'm through with you. Every morning there's a halo hanging from the corner of my girlfriend's four-post bed. I know it's not mine, but I'll see if I can use it for the weekend or a one-night stand. I couldn't understand how to work it out. Oh, once again, as predicted, left my broken heart open and you ripped it out. Something's got me reeling, stopped me from believing, turned me around again. Said that we can do it, oh, you know I wanna do it again. Every morning when I wake up, she always rights the wrongs. She always writes, she always writes. Every morning there's a heartache hanging from the corner of my girlfriend's four-post bed. I know it's not mine and I know she thinks she loves me, but I never can believe what she said. Something so deceiving when you stop believing, turn me around again. You said we couldn't do it, oh, you know I wanna do it again. Every morning when I wake up, every morning, baby, every morning when I wake up, she always rights the wrongs for me, baby. She always rights the wrongs for me. Every morning there's a halo hanging from the corner of my girlfriend's four-post bed. Well, I know it's not mine, but I'll see if I can use it for the weekend or a one-night stand.
Hey, good evening, everybody. And oh God, I'm doing something horrible right now. I'm listening to myself talk, which is almost as bad as making you guys listen to me talk. I appreciate you guys suffering through exams, of course, with me and hanging out with me in the evening for a little bit of a hang sesh. We won't call it a final exam review because that just makes it way too stressful. Instead, it's an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about what's going on, what we've got on our minds, and I don't know, for me to share with you some of my, I really get super esoteric in my music interests. I think mostly because I like to take my super like vanilla bland white guy music interests and try to put some sort of twist on it to make it more interesting. So that's why we're listening to the music of my childhood, played by bluegrass artists. We're going to see how things are going this evening. I've got the stream planned for 10 to 11. And I know for like a lot of you guys, it's like not even a big deal. But for me, it feels like we're having it like in the middle of the night. Because I had the realization the other day that 10 p.m. is about the only time I can reliably get anything done. So I figured like, hey, why not? Maybe you've had a chance to like get done with work, get something to eat, sit down to do something else. But yeah, I'm really excited to have you guys here. Let me know how do we sound? Am I like way too loud, way too quiet? Can y'all hear me okay? It takes the chat a second to catch up with me, so I want to make sure I'm keeping up with everyone. But let me know how are my levels here. It does look like everybody, kind of like me, has a lot going on here at the end of the semester. I think one of the big differences here is that when I'm complaining to people, like I was talking to my mother the other day, telling her like, oh my God, I'm so underwater and all this stuff I need to do for classes. Thank you, Joe and Audrey for letting me know about my sound here. My sound is good, better than my skills at Elden Ring lately, but I complain about like how much I have going on and how busy I am. And my mother helpfully points out that I have nobody to blame but myself for how busy I am. So there is that. Unlike you guys who are like balancing all the stuff that we throw at you. I think a lot of professors like me are guilty of forgetting that you like have other classes, that you have a life, and that in fact, as much as I love my class, and I hope you do too, being one of my students is like just a small part of who you are as a person. So among other things, we can feel free to kind of kvetch here all together about, how things are going. I'm going to vamp for just a couple of minutes here. So if you do not yet already have your evening beverage or snack or whatnot with you, go ahead, feel free to grab that, listen to me on your headphones while you go. I don't know exactly how long we're going to go. I think I've got 12 questions for you guys, as well as a couple of other things we'll go over. I'll ask you for some input here. But I am a little anxious since right now I am playing a very dangerous game of chicken with a couple of people who are much smaller and yet much more powerful than I am. So we are going to see how things go here. I may be joined by 1 or 2 teaching assistants during the session here. I'm praying that I am not. So, again, we'll just see how stuff goes and try it out. Ibtihal, you make a great point about balance and rest being important. And it's funny, we're going to talk about that just a little bit here in a second. But let's go ahead and kind of kick things off. I know we didn't get a chance to do our second Q&A, but this live stream I always think is really important, just because that end of semester stuff is so heavy. The final exams and tests and papers and all of that can just be like, it can feel like way too much all at one time. And, sometimes it can be easy to forget that you got a bunch of people around you who are going through exactly the same thing. And in fact, if we all get here together, we get to see exactly that. I mean, just look at the posts earlier in the chat and you see like we are all struggling with exams right now. And mine is just one of them. Actually, I forgot I've got a little shelf right here, so I can watch them and you guys at the same time. But, a big part of this is just like coming together. You guys have been chatting in discussions. You've had a chance, be messaging with me and each other, and hopefully you've been taking advantage of something like GroupMe to chat with each other too, because like having those connections, that's really important. But it's really important too to be connected with each other and have this balance, as we remember that one way or the other, come this time next week, most of this stuff is going to be done. As you're tackling things like bio and pre-calc and social psychology, that was something that one of my counselors pointed out to me when I was in college and I was really struggling with some of my stuff. For me, Calc 2, Chem 1, and Bio were some of my hardest classes. And I remember being, super overwhelmed the semester where I had all three of those at once. And I remember my counselor pointing out to me, and it's like, I can only really work so hard, right? And I can only work so many hours in a day, and I need to take breaks and take care of myself. And that in the end, no matter what happened, one way or the other, a week later, it would all be over. And, she then helped, walk me through, well, what is my life likely to look like a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? I thought I'd have a lot more money and free time than I do now. But also it's been way more than 10 years since I was in college. But, that idea that like 10 years from now, how I did on a test didn't really matter. In fact, it freed me up in a really big way to feel less stress about it and do a lot better. So I hope you guys are, feeling strong, moving fast, hitting this stuff real hard, but also having an opportunity to take care of yourselves and feel better. So speaking of that stuff that we are preparing for, I've got my list of questions here I want to run through. Before we get in there, though, I'm going to hit you up with a couple of things. More than anything, the questions I got from you guys about this like final set of material, whether it's like test, the last test, the final exam, the last research and analyze assignment, most of the questions were like, yeah, but what is the final, right? Which is real tough, because what I would love to do, it's tough in the sense that like what I really want to do is just like let everybody look at it and see what it is and see that it's just not that big of a deal. But it does have to be like an exam. So what I want to do is give you the best possible idea of what it is that you're walking into here. I'm going to look at my notes, not because I don't know what it is, but because I want to make sure I don't mess it up. And I'm clinging to reality at this point, but so sleep deprived that I really want to make sure I get this stuff right and I don't tell you something wrong. The final exam is cumulative, exactly the way you would expect it to be. Now, all of our tests in this class, in one way or another, have been cumulative. They like build on each other, but this one really is. Anything we have covered this semester is fair game for the final exam. Cumulative means every week's worth of material. I think with the exception of like their like research and writing week, every single week's worth of material is fair game for this exam. And every piece of information is fair game, meaning videos, podcasts, textbook, additional readings, stuff like that. That's all fair game for the exam. We'll talk a little bit about how we might approach those different pieces of material here in a second, but I want you to know like it covers it all. It's pretty impossible to cover everything in the class in 20 or 30 questions, so it will be longer than your other exams. It's going to be 62 questions long, but you will have much longer to complete it, meaning that you'll have, I think, 90 minutes to finish the test once you begin it. But 62 questions. 62 questions sounds like kind of a weird number. It's because it's really 60 questions long with 2 bonus questions. Those 60 questions break down. There are 40 multiple choice questions, just like all of the others you've had this semester. There are 15 true or false questions. Nothing tricky about those. They're exactly what they sound like. There are 5 identification questions or classification questions and 2 bonus questions. I'll run through what you might expect of each of these, and then we'll jump ahead. The multiple choice questions are exactly like those that you've had all semester, but they will not be recycled questions. So you don't want to go back and, plan to copy and paste answers or anything like that. But given that they're very similar kinds of questions to what you've had before, they're written by me, you can expect that they will be similar in the sense of like what they ask about, how they're phrased, how they work. They're pretty similar questions. I see Iptahal's question here. I'm going to come right back to you in just a second, but I'm going to hit these others real quick. The 15 true or false questions. One of the big things that trips students up is the like, well, it sounds mostly true, right? It's like, it sounds mostly true, but I'm not sure if it is all the time true. If the statement is not 100% true, then it's false. So when in doubt, a really great way to test yourself on those questions is to say like, can I think of a time where it's not true? And if you can think of that, the statement is false. So if I said, in relationships, opposites attract. People who are very different are attracted to each other. That would end up being a false statement, because even though you could say like, yeah, I can think of like my aunt and uncle, like, he's really skinny and she's really heavy or something. Like, we know that there are also lots of times in which people who are very similar are attracted to each other. So that'd be a false statement. Identification questions. I'm going to give you guys a big hint here. The identification questions are like classifying what kind of an example the thing is. And when I say a big hint, I'll just tell you they're persuasive techniques. So I give you 5 examples of attempts at persuasion, and I want you to classify which technique each one of them is. The way it's set up, you're not going to be like typing them in. You pick them from a drop-down list. Pretty straightforward stuff. I think you can select more than one. Like, you can select a persuasive technique more than one time. So they're not exclusive. And then the bonus questions are exactly what they sound like. They're bonus points. I mostly ask you what your favorite topic was and what your least favorite topic was. You can put whatever the hell you want in there. You can like tell me a funny joke and you'll still get credit, but I really like to know what it is you guys enjoy and enjoy less. Ibtihal asks a really good question here. Should you study the weekly exams that you've had, before, and will it cover like all of the same stuff? Looking back at previous tests is a really good idea for 2 reasons. For one, it's a really good framework to use to re-examine what it is I think is important information and use it as kind of like a beginning pathway for what material to review. Second, if you really struggled on certain material, that's a big flag that that's a place where you want to put your attention. So looking back at those previous tests is really important. But I'm not going to reuse questions, so don't aim to just like memorize those, because that's not going to help you out a lot. Because in the final exam, when you're stressed, you'll forget all that stuff you memorized, and your ability to think critically will be impaired by the fact that you didn't really study the stuff as intensely or as like comprehensively as you could have before. So definitely look back, but don't just try to memorize stuff. Alexandra asks another good question, whether I think that watching the videos over would help for studying. Ideally, with all of this stuff, you know it all perfectly, and you don't even need to study for the final, because all the final exam does is study how well you learned everything all semester. I know that realistically, like, that's not how the world works. But going back through and re-watching the videos might be a tougher way to study. Instead, hopefully you had the opportunity to do something like take notes on the videos while you watch them. If you had the opportunity to do something like that, going back through those notes where you already distilled out the most important information, that would be a better way to find exactly what it was you needed. We'll get more into specific study techniques, but if you did not take notes, going back through and watching the video might be a helpful thing to do, especially if it's one of those videos that like I recorded where I'm clarifying difficult information or building on with some additional extra information. Absolutely. Devin asks if there's a study guide for the exam. And that was going to be kind of like a surprise here, is that for the first time in the like 10 years maybe I've been teaching, I have kind of a study guide for you guys, but I'll give you a little bit more of a heads up about why I say it's kind of a study guide. But I'll get to that in a second. I'm not going to send you guys out the study guide yet because I want you to be able to focus on what we're talking about here, and then I'll get it to you guys. Lauren asked another really good question. How much of it will be asking about the podcasts? My like ideal way for this class to work is that it's all interconnected, right? That when you watch a video or you listen to a podcast, it's not in isolation, right? It's not just like its own topic, but instead it's like built on or building on, or it forms the foundation for some other piece of information, right? So like a common way I approach it is that your textbook is like the foundation that gives you a lot of the most basic information and definitions and illustrations. And then from there, I build on it with like my videos that maybe I try to illustrate some stuff that is more challenging, or I give you a podcast which takes an idea and builds on it. Like in the social attribution week, which is all about like how we explain people's behavior. Is it who they are, or is it the situation in which they find themselves? I gave you the Invisibilia podcast about like, do we have personalities that are persistent, right? And the idea is that all of this stuff hooks together. And you might ask, a podcast like the Invisibilia one, is it essential that you go back and study? Because I'm guessing, Lauren, when you ask how much of it is asking about the podcast, what you're really asking is, should I go back and focus on the podcasts? And that's always a tough question to answer, because it comes down to like, did you pay much attention on that podcast in the first place? Is it a chapter that you found challenging where this kind of illustration would be helpful? I do not aim to give you questions that will be like, at a specific point in time in the podcast when they were interviewing this person, what did they say about this thing? That kind of defeats the purpose of our whole approach here. I think you should plan on going back and reviewing the podcast. You should go back and look at your notes from the podcasts. Anything you haven't done to this point, you should probably go back and do, just because if you haven't done it, you're not prepared to answer questions on it, and you'll be kicking yourself. This is the real reason why. You'll be kicking yourself when invariably you come across a question on the final exam that would have been answered by having looked at that. So to avoid that, you want to definitely schedule time between now and when you take that final exam to get that stuff done. We'll talk about, when we talk about the study guide here in a second, like a good way to approach that. But definitely, like, we want to schedule that time in there. One of the things that I love that you guys are doing here is asking questions while we're going through here. I want you to keep this up. There are going to be some times where I ask you for some info while we go along, but definitely just feel free to jump on in and ask any questions that come to mind, whether I'm planning to cover them or not. Like, I want to get to them as soon as you think about them. So with that, like, let's take a moment, because even though we're not asking questions about it right now, let's take a moment and talk about the last research and analysis assignment. A lot of times students don't seem as anxious about these research and analysis assignments, which I'm really excited about, because I think they're the places where these assignments are weighted much more heavily than your exams are, because there are so few of them, and the area of your grade is weighted as heavily as it is. And I really want it to be a place where like a huge chunk of your grade comes in, but you're like not stressed out about it because it doesn't feel like that big of a deal, and you're writing about something that feels kind of fun anyway. And I gotta say, guys, like, this semester I have gotten, I think on average, just the highest quality research and analysis submissions that I've ever gotten. So we're doing something right here, because you guys are turning in some really good stuff. I want to talk to you a little bit about what this one looks like, because sometimes students find it overwhelming or confusing, what it is I'm really asking you to do, and then the last piece is what it is you need to do to make sure you get a good grade on it, given that this thing is arguably much more weighty than your final exam is. This last research and analysis assignment asks you guys to pretend to be reality TV producers and to imagine that you are going to try to get bad behavior out of your contestants. Now, I got to ask you guys here, like, who here has a recommendation for a really good reality TV show? I mean, if you're like me, watching reality TV is kind of like watching wrestling. It's like, it's trashy, it's kind of fake, but that's all part of the fun of it, right? Like, sometimes I'll tell people that I like reality TV or that I like wrestling, and they'll say like, well, it's all fake, right? And I'm like, yeah, dog. I don't think like it's really like, you don't go watch a Marvel movie and be like, wow, I'm going to keep my eyes peeled for Spider-Man. Like, yeah, it's not real. It's TV, right? But the cool thing about reality TV, what I love about it, and I started to think about this when I was watching The Bachelorette and listening to a podcast about The Bachelorette. I was taking part in a fantasy league for The Bachelorette. It says something about me that like I've never done a fantasy football or a March Madness bracket. Like, I've never done that, but we pretty religiously do our like Bachelorette brackets. But what we realized is that like there's this level you can enjoy the Bachelorette on, which is like, there are these people who are going to fall in love on TV and get married and stay together forever. And I mean, there's a part of you that has to be into that a little bit to enjoy it. But then there's this deeper level you can get into, which is this like, this setting is insane. Like, yeah, we all want to find someone to be with, and we want to be happy and feel that human connection. But you don't sign up to like win the reality TV love show to get there, right? Like, it's insane. And so when you see people behave in crazy ways on this television show, you can step back and you can say, like, you know, somebody like my mother who hates this stuff, she'd just say, like, well, it's scripted. And I don't think it gives enough credit, or maybe it gives too much credit to say it's scripted, when the reality is that it's like a fantastic place to watch social psychology in action. That these studies that we, you know, have called the most unethical studies in history, you know, Stanley Milgram's obedience experiment, the Stanford prison experiment, stuff like that could never be replicated today. We take worse shit than that, we put it on broadcast TV, and we call it reality television. And, you know, that's what really makes it fascinating, is that, you know, if you've never watched it, I would be excited to see, like, you know, who here is also part of Bachelor Nation. But if you've never watched this really bad but wonderful TV show, you know, you have like 30 people, you know, all of them, you know, almost all of them, you know, heterosexual, almost all of them white, you know, compete on camera for, you know, ultimately a proposal from the bachelor or bachelorette. And, you know, what you realize is that, like, locking these people in a house, frequently they're overtired, they're constantly in competition with each other for attention to win, stripping them of contact with the outside world. They're not allowed social media, they're not allowed contact with their friends and family. They're frequently not allowed to eat food, but they are allowed to consume alcohol. Like, no wonder we get crazy behavior out of these people, right? It's a little bit like, if you're not ready for The Bachelor and Bachelorette, you should absolutely check out The Circle on Netflix. The first season of The Circle is maybe my favorite reality TV show ever, because it is the most pure example of this stuff, where these people in isolation are desperate for connections with each other, and you see it borne out in their behavior. But in this assignment, I ask you to pretend like you're one of these horrible reality TV show producers trying to get really bad behavior out of people, and use what you know about social psychology to make that happen. In the end, the reality TV show part of this assignment is really just what we would call the framing device. It's the part that makes it fun, right? It's more than me just asking you to, like, list terms. And I say fun, like, in scare quotes, because it's only as fun as, like, an assignment can be, or almost only as much fun as you want to make it. But, you know, sometimes I have fun thinking about, like, well, I know all this stuff about social psychology. How would I, on a TV show like this, then try to manufacture a situation where people behave the way that they do on television? So ultimately what I'm looking for is your knowledge of social psychology and your ability to conduct research in social psychology. That's ultimately what I'm looking for. So the reality TV show part, cool, but ultimately show me that you can manipulate people's behavior for, you know, these nefarious ends, and you are going to be where you need to be. Now, in the end, to make sure that you get the grade you're looking for, that you do as well as you can, take a look at the rubric. That's the number one thing, because it's literally what I use to evaluate people. Step one, do you identify the sources that you need to identify, right? So popular and peer-reviewed sources. Number two, do you critically evaluate those sources? Meaning, do you not just introduce them, but you also say, like, this is why we should believe them. This is the perspective that I'm seeing. This is why maybe I'm going to use it, but it's not very believable, right? That's the number one place that I end up docking students points on all of these assignments, is that they introduce the thing, but they don't really talk about the source at all. They just use it. You want to imagine that, like, I was trying to convince you that this is how reality TV works, and I say, like, oh yeah, this book written by this person said it. Like, would you just believe me because it's a book? Or would you maybe want to know why I'm saying you should believe the book? So find the appropriate sources, analyze those sources, bring in course information, social psychology stuff, effectively use that social psychology and researched stuff. In other words, don't just list terms, but use them to, like, make a point. And the last part is write an essay. But, you know, again, you guys have really been knocking this stuff out of the park. So for most folks, if you focus on that part of analyzing the sources, you're going to be really, really strong in this. I think that's pretty much it for these. Devin says, could I provide, like, a loose example of how to use a source to support a statement? I think a really good rule to go by is to, when you are planning your assignment, because remember, if you're not writing your assignment until, like, it's time to write it for real, you're not giving yourself the time to come up with something that is truly great. Start by planning ahead of time, today, tomorrow, this writing assignment. But when you come down to planning this stuff out, when you make an argument, when you make a statement or an assertion, when you say, I'm going to get these people to behave aggressively by pitting them against each other in these games, right? And it is well established that people who are competing against each other are much more likely to behave aggressively than people who are not forced to compete with each other. That's the kind of statement where I would automatically say, says who. So that's where you would want to use a source to support it. So you might say, I will pit people against each other in competitive games because, according to psychological researcher Dr. Keltner, which actually is a guy who studies like aggression and competition, according to Dr. Keltner's research in middle schoolers, when forced to compete against each other in athletic games, they reported higher levels of aggression and out-group biases and stuff like that, right? The point is, you don't have to get into lots of detail, but you want to introduce a source that says, like, I'm making this point, and you should believe this point because I've got this source. And even just telling me, Dr. Keltner, leading researcher in aggression and power, cool, I can believe him because of that. That's the sort of like analyzing sources I'm looking for. Or if you say like, according to an article published in Bustle, The Bachelorette functions this way. Bustle's maybe not like the best source. You could say, Bustle is not the most reliable source, but it can be difficult to find peer-reviewed sources examining the functioning of, producers behind the scenes of reality TV shows. You're essentially allowing yourself to use the source while saying, like, maybe we don't all believe it 100% all the time. That was a really good question, Devin. So feel free to drop more questions about the writing assignment here in the chat. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and run through some of the questions that you guys have about the test, about the writing assignment. Feel free to stop me at any point. First question, will there be a study guide for the final? If you see me looking around here, it is because I am looking for a thing I made for you guys. I did not make a study guide. I made a thing that's kind of a study guide. It's think of it kind of like a guide that'll tell you, like, as you're getting ready for the test, the stuff that you might want to like study. But it's not a study guide. It's just like kind of a study guide. I'm going to go ahead and post the link here for you guys to have it. It is cleverly titled. The link is bit.ly/kind-of-a-study-guide. I would take a look at that here. I'm going to answer, Devin, your question here in just a second. But bit.ly/kind-of-a-study-guide is the thing that I made up for you guys. Ultimately, here's why I only call it kind of a study guide. The first half of kind of a study guide is like my study tips, kind of boiled down, the things that I think will be really helpful in getting you prepared. Starting with like how to structure your study time so that you're really ready and using your time effectively. The second half of it does list important topics and concepts, but here's the trick. They are the same important topics and concepts that I give you in the instructions for each of the tests when I say like potential topics may include, and then I list them there. Like I tell you guys, like I literally copied and pasted those into this document because I thought it might be helpful to have all of those things distilled down in one place where you can use them as a little bit of a roadmap. So that's what I got you guys as far as the study guide. It looks like one, but it's not really anything new. One of these days I'll get around to making something new, but at that point you'll already be a psychologist or you'll have made better life decisions than I have, and you'll be making lots of money doing something else that's a lot easier. Devin asks a good question here. What's the best search engine? There are two search engines that I like to use when conducting research. The first is whatever the fuck you want. Bing, Google, DuckDuckGo, whatever. If you're looking for a popular source, like something that's not a peer-reviewed academic source, that's what I would use. If you are looking for an academic source, so like a peer-reviewed journal published by psychologists for other psychologists to read, that sort of thing, I would use Google Scholar. That is scholar.google.com. Your library would tell you not to use that because they've got better ones. And even though they have more powerful search engines, it is really hard to beat the ease of searching with Google. The trick is, once you've found an article that you think might work well through Google Scholar, because it's just like Googling through articles, you can then access that through the library. You've got the title of the article, you've got the publication it's published in, you've got the authors. In fact, if you're using Google Scholar and you're on a Santa Fe campus, you'll have access right there. But if you're off campus, you can log in through the library, go through the database, and get it the old school way. Yeah, so like Devin, you're saying like using JSTOR to search for something like anger, competitive game shows. Part of that might be that you're searching in JSTOR, whereas there are not, like, JSTOR does not tend to hold psychology findings as much as like PubMed might. But the cool thing about Google Scholar is that it searches JSTOR and it searches PubMed and it searches like lots of other stuff too. So that's why I would go into Google Scholar. I would also try to do a couple of things when searching. For one, I would go for the simplest possible search. So something like anger and competition, right? Or anger and game shows, or competition, game shows, something like that. And then, like I'm saying here, like, be willing to be flexible with your searches. Swap out terms. Try to think up new terms. Try to think up synonyms. Because the chances that a psychologist or sociologist conducting a study like decided to use the same terms you did are like relatively low. So that's why I want to be able to change that stuff up. That's a really good question for this kind of research. We'll talk more about that in a second, but I did want you guys to have the study guide. A really great question that I got from a number of folks, now that you guys have the study guide in hand, is like how to prepare for the final. And I'm curious here for you guys who are hanging out with me, are in the chat there. Let me know, what do you like to do that you find is effective for studying? I'm always really interested to know what people do to get ready for tests that I don't already know about. In general, my pointers include things like getting started now. It may feel like you don't want to get started now, or you've got other more pressing things. So don't take a ton of time now. Instead, take some time to come up with a plan. Look back at previous week's material, identify where the difficult stuff is, and then come up with a list of the things that you really want to study. And then look at your calendar and plot it out in such a way that you can spend a little bit of time every single day studying. Thing I got to throw like a big shout out for. I do not have as much time to play video games now as I used to. Even though I am dying to play Elden Ring every minute of every day, I simply cannot. So instead, I take a few minutes every single day and I do my Japanese lessons on Duolingo. It's like not a big deal. You don't have to do Japanese in Duolingo, but I really like Duolingo because as a way to learn something new, which is something I have not done in a really long time, it has an approach that simply encourages you to do it every single day, whether it's 1 minute or 10 minutes or an hour. They just want you to do it every single day. And the result is it becomes a part of your routine to always be thinking about it. When are you going to do it? How are you going to fit it in? And you always feel accomplished. You're never behind. So instead of like waiting till the last minute to get started now so that even when you're not working on psychology, it's kind of rolling around in the back of your head and it's an easy thing to fit in. Plus, that way you can avoid having the 6-hour study session since you study like 15 minutes every day for 12 days. I think, there's some really great examples here. Making your own study guides and going through your notes are really good ones. I give you some examples in the study guide that I gave you guys, but in general, like putting as much effort as you can into it as possible is going to be really helpful. I see like Alexandra's example of like coming up with things that are relevant, that are kind of clever, that are kind of funny. These are some good ways to make sure that you remember material effectively later. Oh no, hold on a second. I might be out of time. Well, for a moment, we'll see. We will keep going. But I think Devin and Iptahal, what you guys are saying here is a really common thing. And if you want some really good personalized ways to focus on a regular basis, do what I do. Talk to an academic success coach. Like I actually meet with the coaches now because I like used to be one and I help run the program. And they help me figure out like how to get my shit done. And a big part of it is to come up with a plan that you do it like every single day, a little tiny bit. And what you find is you avoid the anxiety that produces procrastination, because it's not laziness, it's anxiety that makes that happen, which is cool. I've already answered a couple of these. Are we going to be able to look back at past exams to review for the final? Absolutely. Go ahead and knock that shit out. What are some of the better studying techniques? That was kind of a repeat of what I had before. But I would avoid highlighting. I would avoid rereading. I would avoid memorizing, because even though it can feel like memorizing is a quick way, because like you touch a piece of information, you put it away and move on to the next one, what you find is it takes much longer to get that information in your head as like sticky as it needs to be for you to use it for the final exam. Instead, spending more time on it, you will approach that information a smaller number of times, and overall you'll remember it a lot better, way more efficiently. Like Alexandra says, teaching it to someone else, a roommate, a significant other, a friend, a family member, are really great examples. If you can teach a little bit to somebody else, or be in a study group, like being in a study group, especially if you guys have a group me or something like that going on, get in there and do it. You'll be really happy. Teaching it to someone else, you'll remember it a lot better. I was going to see your final exam. I got a question. Does it replace your lowest test? Your final exam replaces your 2 lowest tests, I believe. So it can replace up to 2 of your lowest tests. The way it works out is you get a total of 9 scores in this class, 7 regular tests and 2 final exam grades. I keep your 7 highest. So some people will ask, can you then just like skip the final? I could say, yeah, if you're feeling brave or cheeky. But in general, I would say go ahead and take it. Will the final exam be similar questions? We've already talked about they should be pretty similar stuff, right? Oh, this was pretty good. I've got there are a couple of personal questions here. Here's a good one. What are my plans for the summer? My plan for the summer is to figure out how to get my baby to sleep and my toddler to poop on the potty. And if I can do that, I will feel more accomplished than if I had like cracked the nut of how to be like a real good teacher. Because man, trying to get a baby to sleep and a toddler to poop is hard stuff. I did have a big accomplishment recently. I taught my toddler the appropriate reaction whenever somebody says, guess what? If you can guess what I taught my toddler to say when someone says, guess what? Go ahead and drop it in the chat there, because it is absolutely the best one. Chris, I am happy to see that you missed this class a lot. It is a funny thing. Anybody who has like subscribed to my channel does get updates when I do this live stream stuff. So if I'm bothering you in the middle of the night, 2 years from now doing middle of the night live streams, you can remember to unsubscribe there. I do hope you guys are enjoying this class enough to miss it in the future. Oh, thank God, Devin. I really appreciate you getting in there with that chicken butt, because, man, that is my toddler's favorite thing now. This is a good question I really like. What's a difficult topic that I recommend you studying more? Take a second right now and go on in there and let me know in the chat. What is a topic that you think is really tough, that you think it could be one that you have overcome, that you feel like you've got a really good grasp on now, but you think other people should focus on, or it could be one that you're struggling with right now. Go ahead and just drop it in the chat. A topic that you think is like one that merits more studying. For me, the ones that I thought were really challenging were generally social cognition and social attribution, because they're really complicated topics. They ask you to think about how you think about how you think. And if you're not used to doing that already, it's a tough thing to like force yourself to do and to wrap your head around. It's not that there's a ton of information. It's just like a real challenge to get used to. The social self is another one where it's like the self concept is this really tricky thing where you're like, yeah, but how do I end up thinking about who I am? And if I like something, is that because I like it, or is it just because I'm good at it, or just because I feel like I'm good at it compared to other people? I think I told you guys before, like, I can feel pretty good about pogs because like I'm the only person like right now in this chat who even knows what the hell a pog is. And I'm not talking about like that dumb pog champ thing from last year. But I mean, those are some of the ones that I think were some of the more challenging things. There's some elements like group functioning that can be challenging, like the the stages of group formation, but a lot of that is stuff that if you put it in like common sense language, you remember a lot better. Or if you have examples, which again, this is why I have stuff like the podcast, because cautionary tales in particular is one that like I find illustrates a lot of our concepts in a really good way. Social affect is another good one, because that's, emotions. And, some of this stuff can be like, you need to know what those 7 basic emotions are, but also these different models of emotion. And then the ways that emotions affect how we think, and how we think affects the ways that our emotions work. And then with a lot of this stuff, the more that we get like later in the semester, the more these issues can be complicated. Like we learn that affect and relationships are related to each other, that initial attraction is much more likely to spark if you're already experiencing a heightened affect. Or we find out that people from groups outside of ours are more likely to create negative affects in us, causing us to attribute their maladaptive behaviors in these really like negative ways. So that stuff, I think like it can get difficult, it can get complicated, and paying attention to the stuff that you're like really struggling with, or that you don't know all that well, like that's really where you want to put your time. This is actually our last question for tonight, a really good question to go out on. If the lowest graded essay is dropped and we have a lot of work in our other classes, would we be penalized in any way if we maybe skip the last essay if we're satisfied with our grade? Asking for a friend. And here's the trick. I say like, if you're feeling brave or you're feeling cheeky, skip the last essay. Skip the final exam because it'll drop your lowest stuff. But you want to be really confident in where you stand in the class. And that means that you probably want to calculate your grade on your own, like pen and paper, calculate it on your own, in case that, like, for example, you don't have your most recent research and analyze assignment grade in yet, or you don't have all the test grades in yet, or you're not 100% sure that Canvas is calculating your grade correctly. For example, right now, I believe Canvas is not counting your final exam because it hasn't been taken yet. And what that means is that you've got 7 test grades right now, and Canvas knows to drop your 2 lowest test grades, so it's doing that, meaning that you're seeing your grade right now with your 5 highest test scores. And then what's going to happen is if you skip the final, all of a sudden you're going to have 2 zeros in play that were not in play before, and Canvas is going to go, oh shit, zeros? I'm going to go ahead and like drop the hell out of those zeros. And all of a sudden, those 2 low grades that were being dropped before are going to come right back in, right? The point is, you can have an artificial confidence in your grade right now. And I know all of this sounds complicated, and it kind of is. Iptahal, I see you asking, like, can I repeat that? I drop your lowest research and analyze assignment and your 2 lowest tests. You can try to game the system and like play that game of do you need to do it or not? But the best way to think about this stuff is that like you have a certain number of writing assignments you need to complete, and asking whether or not you should like skip the last one is about as pertinent as asking whether or not you should skip the first one or the second one, right? Think about what it would be like to ask me like, well, can I skip the second writing assignment? I'd say like, well, yeah, but that'll be your 0 and you probably don't want to do that. You can ask the same thing about like your tests, right? You could say, well, can I skip the final exam? And I'd be like, sure, but I have a similar feeling about that I would to you like skipping your second and third tests. It's maybe like not as great of an idea as just like studying for and taking it. And I know like that's easy for me to say when I'm not taking 4 or 5 classes and working a full-time job and taking care of 2 kids and, taking my mom to chemo appointments. Like, life is really complicated, and we all have to make the choices that'll work best for us. But in general, if you can, I say to get something in, because something is better than nothing. And I swear to God, guys, I'm going to work really, really hard to give you every last point I can. And if there is literally nothing turned in, I can't give you anything but a 0. If you've got something in there, I can try to find a way to get you some points for it and make it worth your time to have it in there. So if it seems like I'm rushing a little bit, it's because I can see my baby squirming around like crazy. So I'm afraid I'm going to dip out here maybe 15 minutes earlier than expected initially. You guys have been a fantastic class. I've had some really killer conversations. with a lot of you guys. I've been really enjoying the discussions online. You guys have been getting up to some business in there, and your writing assignments are crazy good. So that's another reason why I want you to turn in your last writing assignments, is because I want to read every last one of them. I want to see what y'all are up to. If you have more questions about the final exam, which is available now and will stick around until the Friday of exams week. If you have questions about the writing assignment, if you have questions about final grade or a psychology career or anything else, let me know. If you're not sure what to do for the summer or which bluegrass cover of Toto's Africa is the best one, like, hit me up, let me know, and I will hook you up. Oh, by the way, picking on the 90s, I think, is the thing I played a couple of songs from earlier. I am going to close out and leave up during the closing screen. Oh, you know what? I was going to do it, but instead I'll just tell you to look it up because I forgot. I don't have access to it now because I'm streaming at the same time. Do yourself a favor, go on Spotify and look up Single Ladies by the Cleverleys. It's a bluegrass cover of All the Single Ladies, and it is horrible how good it is. Like, just how downright good it is. All the Single Ladies by the Cleverleys. I'll put it here in chat. So do yourself a favor. Single Ladies by the Cleverleys. Or maybe it's just Single Ladies, but I can't never remember. But anyways, it's so good. Goddamn, I laughed so hard the first time it came on. So go look for it. Thank you for an awesome semester. Good luck with final exams. Good luck with your last writing assignment. And again, I will look forward to giving you guys some really killer, awesome grades. So go kick butt. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Tell me, do you think it'd be alright if I could just crash here tonight? And you could see I'm in no shape for driving, and anyway, I've got no place to go. You know it might not be that bad. You were the best I'd ever had. If I hadn't blown the whole thing years ago, hell, I might not be alone. Tomorrow we can drive around this town and let the cops chase us around. Past is gone, but something might be found to take its place. Hey, jealousy. Hey, jealousy. Hey, jealousy. Hey, jealousy. And you can trust me not to think and not to sleep around. And if you don't expect too much from me, well, you might not be let down. 'Cause all I really want is to be with you, feeling like I matter too. If I hadn't blown the whole thing years ago, well, I might be here with you. Tomorrow we can drive around this town and let the cops chase us around. The past is gone, but something might be found to take its place. Hey, jealousy. Hey, jealousy. Hey, jealousy. Hey, jealousy. Drive around this town and let the cops chase us around. The past is gone, but something might be found to take its place. Hey, jealousy. Hey, jealousy. Hey, jealousy. Hey, jealousy. You tell me, do you think it'd be alright if I could just crash here tonight? You see I'm in no shape for driving, And anyway, I got no place to go. And you know it might not be that bad. You were the best I'd ever had. If I hadn't blown the whole thing years ago, hell, I might not be alone. Tomorrow we can drive around this town, let them cops chase us around. The past is gone, but something might be found.